Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Telivy MSP podcast. Very, very excited to introduce our guest here today. George, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is George Bardisi. Been in this sandbox for a long time, but I originally started an MSP myself back in 2000, 2001. In late 2014, started a vendor that works exclusively with MSPs called VoIP. And then in 2020, started an entity called the MSP Initiative, which is a community approach to the industry where we have done a bunch of different things, all collaborating with both vendors and MSPs throughout the industry. So I love the MSP sandbox. It gets sandy, but I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, George. And we're going to dive into each of those of your experiences here today as well. But just to introduce myself, hello, everybody. I'm Jeremy, head of partnerships at Telivy, and we're an automated risk assessments platform for over 100 MSPs. MSPs like Halt Data Solutions, Triad Networks, and Level 5 Management love Telivy because they use it to run automated risk assessments to win new clients, provide quarterly security reports to existing clients, help them meet compliance, and reduce risk assessments that take 7 to 8 days manually to under 5 hours with Telivy fully automated. All right, George, let's jump right into it. Tell us about BVoIP.
Yeah, I mean, BVoIP's, threads really go back to the early days of George MSP, which was, hey, everybody's supposed to be standardizing everything in all these categories, and you're not supposed to have multiple vendors in each of these areas, or else it's impossible to scale. And for some reason, when you go in and you write that flat fee program to your end customer, and kind of be the replacement internal IT offering for those businesses that cannot make sense of having a full-time person there, the phone system is in its own lane, right? And everybody has everything from everybody, and it's a little bit of this and who's responsible for what, and like that category never really molded properly to the plan or the blueprint from MSP standpoint. So in a way of trying to solve our own problem within the MSP that we
Hmm.
started back in Philly Metro in the early 2000s. We're like, how come we do not have a standardized offering in this category? Why is it that we're burning time that we're not actively charging for? To be totally honest,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone properly handles vendor management as part of their MSP pricing scheme. And we just got to the point where it was like burning so much time, at the time for us, that we really needed an answer. And then we went out into the world and said, hey, is there an MSP focused solution like all these other categories, right? Backup and security and networking and documentation and monitoring, and like still like was a very direct sales force with like a bolt-on partner program, little bit square peg round hole.
Hmm.
Didn't quite fit, and so we said, okay, fine, nobody wants to do this, let's do it, let's fix this lane. And that's kind of where the beginnings of BVoIP started. When we got to, I'll call it November of 2014, is when we like finally launched BVoIP as a channel only solution, only working exclusively with IT and managed services companies around the world. And like we knew that that was our blueprint and how we were going to do this. And from 2014 until now, it's been pretty crazy adventure. And we have definitely interacted with thousands of MSPs along our journeys,
Wow.
in Europe, here in the US, and Canada, and Australia, and New Zealand, and it's dragged us all over the place. But it is definitely interesting because, like, along that journey, we've seen a lot of MSPs, we've seen a lot of companies spawn from MSPs, right? Like BVoIP. And we've seen companies come down from the enterprise into MSP land. And we've seen a lot of companies come, and we've seen the same companies not hang in there long enough to make it work. So I've seen all sorts of different angles to this conversation, and yeah, there's not any one right way, but it's definitely interesting to see the people that do have staying power versus the people that like don't even make it 12 months and pull the plug. So
Interesting. I want to dive into that in a second, but first I want to dive into, I'd love to understand more about how you work with your customers from the day you meet, what was their initial problem that they maybe came to you with, or you went to them to expose and educate them on, to how you solve their initial problem, to what do you do with them today. Yeah.
Yeah. So as BVoIP, again, a channel only vendor, there's a multi-layered conversation, right, on how we connect with people inside of the sandbox from MSP standpoint. I feel it's a very event-driven industry, so we do a ton of events. Let's call it 100+ events a year. So that's very outbound, right? And then we get like 60 to 80 inbound just off of Google, or just hit our website, or have never interacted with these people. They filled out, hey, I want to learn more type inquiries a month. And a lot of where we speak to these people, is because we heavily integrate into the line of business apps and the tools and the integrations to like the systems they run on a day to day, right? So there's a very cool conversation, right, about how this fits inside of an MSP itself, and leveraging the investments they've already made and kind of connecting them when it comes to a communication standpoint. And then like the other part of that conversation is, all right, I'm going to put something inside of your business that hopefully you like and that works well and that adds additional functionality that you are after that you didn't have. Um, when your customer raises their hand, and they will, and they do, for any solution, by the way, not just our category, why is it that almost every person that I've run into in MSP land will say, "Oh yeah, yeah, we'll take care of you," and then like quickly are calling and trying to figure out, do I have an answer, and let me like sign up for something that can solve that end customer's need. Well, our hope is that, hey, the thing that you're using internally from BVoIP that you like, that hopefully works really well for you, can be something that you could offer to your end customer as well, right? So close the gap, use the solution that you're comfortable with, and hopefully answer the need for your customer in a way that generates revenue for you, by the way. So a lot of the needs that we get, a lot of the things that MSPs find us for, start with, hey, I have this PSA, this ticketing system, this CRM, this marketing tool, this RMM, this documentation platform, this. And like, we're trying to figure out a way to handle the 50% of the inquiries, calls, issues that come in via phone call, via chat, via SMS, that isn't a ticketing portal or email, right? And like, we struggle to get this information to tie into all of our tools and become efficient for those, inbound, outbound communications. Seems like you have an answer that's very MSP focused, and we do. So that's primarily what a lot of people come to us from a requirements or needs standpoint, and then how we turn around and try and help them. And then ultimately, like, let's say somebody wants to drive the car, right? Nobody likes to just buy on site, right? Like, let me take it around for a spin and make sure this does what I want it to do. So they probably go through some sort of trial, and then after the trial, it's like, okay, let's see what the math looks like. Does this fit? Can I afford this? Does it fit the budget? Whatever. And then our then goal would be, after they commit to coming on board, to actually do a train the trainer type model, where we take the people that are inside of the organization that need to learn the technology, and we crash course them through the parts they need to know. So that on the other side, they feel like they're pretty comfortable with it, pretty confident in it. And then at that point, it's, hey, if you need more of that, or as you run into more opportunities outside of even your own internal requirements, we're happy to like speed through that process, right? So at the end of the day, like, documentation is important, how-to videos, guides, right? Everybody learns differently, Jeremy, but like, I'm a hands-on guy, so I want to put a human being attached to that process so that we can cut through what needs to be done and like see it in real time. And then if they want to use all of that stuff for reference, cool. It's there. We got it. But I feel like a lot of companies are so busy running their businesses, totally expected, that when they run into a new solution, whether it be in person at some trade event or just through a web meeting, They get busy. They put it on the shelf. 6 months go by. They just didn't have the time to concentrate in on it. And then, like, you get to a point where, well, if I'm not using it, I guess I'll shut off the lights, right? So we feel that attaching a human being to that process has a better success rate of getting somebody to the point where the car is running and configured the way that they want than just leaving it to their own, you know, timeline. So, in a nutshell, that's how we go from, hey, how do people find us? What are they looking for? How do we try and solve for that requirement? And then what the process is to get them to a point where, like, things are running.
Interesting. So, just to make sure I understand you, you basically bring your own team into an MSP's team to help them streamline their processes and basically make the most out of the tools and software and
When it
vendors
comes
that
to
they're
our
using.
part, yeah, I mean, keep in mind that the average MSP will integrate to our platform from a communication standpoint, their ticketing system or PSA, right, which is pretty important tool. If they're using something else for a CRM, right, think like HubSpot, Infusionsoft, something like Salesforce, they also plug that in. If they have a documentation tool, right, they likely plug that in so that as people are calling, they can screen pop the relevant information in front of the person answering. And then think about from a reporting standpoint, right? I want to take my call recordings, my call logs, my link into the PSAs and the CRMs, and I want to create meaningful, business intelligence reporting and then be able to have visibility into what's happening, right? You tie those things together. That's what you usually see MSPs do when they adopt our solution internally. And so the goal is to make the workflow easier, cleaner, and more automated when it comes to how they're communicating with the outside world. That's largely why MSPs start with VoIP, right? Because, like, hey, you hear the word VoIP, right? 1,000 solutions out there. We all know the big names in the industry. Making the phone ring, I think we all got that part. No problem, fairly easy. But when you can integrate into the pieces that the systems that you use to run your business, different context. So,
Okay, so BVoIP is a platform for MSPs to basically integrate all of the tools that they're using, so they could see it on like a dashboard
yeah,
or see data from each of the integrations.
yeah. So imagine the customer calls in and like let's say they're following up on a support issue that was started prior, right? We could recognize that caller and then decide, do we prompt them for additional information? Do they have a PIN code to identify themselves? Do they have a ticket number that they're entering? Once I collect, hopefully, more than just basic information, we can go into the tools and figure out, well, who are they supposed to be talking to, where to route that call. And so by the time they actually get routed and a human being gets prompted for that call, for example, all of the relevant tools that they're working in are already on their screen. The tickets on their screen, the last note that was entered is in front of them, the documentation tools pop to their account, the SharePoint site is in front of them, and, like, now all of a sudden the thing that happens that everybody gets so salty about when they call, I don't know, your credit card company, for example, and, like, you get transferred 8 times is
Hmm.
over. You know what I mean? And, like, now we've now can, from a tracking standpoint, can now understand, all right, this is a person that's calling in. We know who they are. We've routed them to the right person internally. We're tracking that call against your existing tools. Let's say there's a call recording of that's attached into your ticketing system, for example. And,
Hmm.
like, now when you go back to report off of what's going on, how many times you've interacted with your customer, who are the people holding their weight on your team versus the people who aren't. Maybe you have a really noisy end customer. You want to figure out what's happening with them so we can, like, bring their noise level down, and you can see all of these reporting points that you probably didn't have in one place before.
Is this mainly for like customer management, customer support, those types of tools and integrations, or is
Yeah.
there a technical uh, um, IT solutions like running IT tools and things like that?
I
integrated?
mean, listen, like we started with what works today, meaning like most MSPs aren't running their business on email and Excel, right? There's usually multiple tools, right? Like an MSP is no different than any other business, right? There's back office who are handling invoicing and scheduling and all that other stuff. There's probably sales at some level. It depends on the size of the company and like how do we incorporate that group. There's clearly frontline help desk and technical support, right? Probably somebody doing projects to some level, right? Implementation and projects. And if they're big enough, maybe somebody doing account management, right? Once then a customer is actually part of the system. When you take a look at all of those departments, they all interface in one way or another. And there's different tools that are being used across those departments. And so if we can interconnect, think about a multi CRM style way, if we can interconnect all of those tools, anytime communication is going inside or outside of the company, outside of the CRM or email, we want to track that and streamline that process. So think about it as a big rubber band. You kind of like loop all of those departments together. But ultimately, we do make the phone ring. There are things like call queues and auto attendants and voicemail. But even going a step further, right? On call management, right? Depending on what kind of technology company you are. Like not everybody's running 3 shifts today with a 24/7. So, like, let's say a call comes in after hours, right? And somebody leaves a message. Maybe it's urgent. We have an escalation app within our tool that allows you to set who's on call and try the first person and then the second person and the third person. And like, there's all these different workflow apps that have been written into the platform to like solve for different needs from a technology service business that also could extend to your end customer too, right? So think about any business that could be, fielding calls outside of normal hours that need to get alerted. I mean, that's kind of where the answering service business has existed for decades, right? Could be the HVAC company, could be a doctor's office, could be whatever, right? Multiple different use cases. So a lot of the things we build for the MSP are also things that translate into the end user real world scenario. And so they can also offer that level of automation to their end customer as well, right? So like, think
Interesting.
about our appointment reminder system, for example, right? How many times have you gotten a text message every time your dentist or your car dealer is reminding you of an appointment or something like that, right? So like we constantly are trying to check boxes that do more than just, you know, add a bolt line to your phone, right? To your desk, right? Just make the phone ring.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier that you built VoIP out of needing to solve a problem that you encountered in your own MSP. I'm curious, what
Mm-hmm.
was that initial problem, and how did you
Yeah.
solve it
So
initially?
I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's worth, repeating, right? Like usually in this business, standardization is so critical, right? So like you would be taught from the most successful people running really profitable companies that multiple backup solutions are probably not scalable or multiple security solutions, like why would you want this type of EDR on this company and this type of EDR at that company and this type of XDR at that company? By the time you've, you know, taken in all of the vendors that your customers are already using, how do you manage all of that? How do you keep up with all those vendors? How do you keep all your systems updated? Like you're constantly learning because all of these tools and systems are constantly changing.
Is that what
That
you were
doesn't work.
experiencing firsthand as an MSP owner? Had all these different tools, and you just couldn't manage them, or couldn't even take full advantage of them.
Well, in this case, what we experienced as an MSP was that, let's say you had a Toshiba system and the other person had a Cisco system and the other person had Teams phone and the other person had Zoom phone and this guy had Nextiva, 8x8, Ring Central, um, Jive, and you just kept like to the point where like what should be one vendor, one line item turned into 50 separate vendors in one category. How exactly are you supposed to be doing vendor management for that many companies in one line item? Can you really do that effectively? And if you are doing it effectively, are you charging appropriately to play all of these, keep up with all of these vendors? I'm going to tell you most IT services or managed services companies that are doing this profitably and successfully tell you that that's not going to work, right? So in your case, you said, hey, you have a really cool platform that takes something that takes 5, 6, 7 days and makes it 5 hours. So you found a way to take a really long and arduous thing and shrink it into something that's same day. But you can't do that when your customers are coming to you saying, well, I bought this thing 15 years ago. It's still running. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And now all of a sudden, they're expecting
Mm,
you to do as move changes on that really old tool or system. And
I
like, because
see.
employees come and go. And now all of a sudden, you're like, I can't even do that remotely, or I got to call a third party to come and do something. And like, all of a sudden, what could be a 5 minute task turns into a 5 day problem. So it's actually the reverse of what it sounds like you do. It takes something that should be simple and makes it really, expanded in terms of time investment. That doesn't work. So a lot of people in our space in MSP land would say, well, just outsource that to somebody else. Are you going to have 50 outsourced vendors, one for each manufacturer? That's hard to manage too. So, like, what are you going to do? And so I would say that the most mature and most profitable companies in our space would say, we are going to decide to own this lane, vet solutions, adopt that solution internally, and standardize the offering to the end customer so that as we continue to grow, the tech stack that's being offered to everyone that we're supporting is the same. Okay, well, sounds great because on average, Jeremy, an MSP is going to have 40 to 60 third party vendor relationships across their entire tech stack. And that's assuming one vendor in each category, right? So maybe it's your company in risk assessments. Maybe it's another company in compliance. Maybe it's another company in um, your firewall vendor. Maybe it's another company in your backup vendor. Maybe it's another company in your network infrastructure vendor, right? And like by the time you add it all together, 40 to 60 vendors as part of the combination of all the technology that a managed services provider would usually take to their end customer, right? That's a lot. And like, by the way, it can be done well, by automating as much as possible, right? Like part of probably how your technology is so exciting is, again, you've automated parts that otherwise take a long time to do by hand. Well, as an MSP, if I can take these 40 to 60 vendors and automate things like as move changes and monitoring and like pulling all of your alerting into one place, like now all of a sudden you can function much more intelligently instead of manually, each portal, each solution at a time. There's absolutely no difference in this category. And I would argue most companies, whether they've shifted to a digital or soft phone experience and they've abandoned the desk phone, that's fine. At some point, there's still a phone number and somebody still should be communicating with their end customer in real time. I don't know about you, maybe I'm wrong, but when I need 911, do I text them? I don't. I call them. I need somebody right away. If I want to contact the fire department, do I email them? No, I'm going to call them, right? So, like, there's a certain part of technology that isn't, well, I'll get to you when I want to, or hurry up and wait. You got to wait in line. Some of it is priority issues, right? And so you can't just abandon real time communications and just get back to people whenever you feel like it. You got to
Oh,
need to, at
100%.
some point, get past the bot.
Yeah, we talked to a lot of MSPs, and one of their biggest selling points is that 24-hour or two rings, right? And we're going to pick up the phone. That kind of customer service, right? It's building that trust, that relationship. We're always going to be there for you to support you. I'm curious just to try. I'd love to understand the story, the story of the time where you were bogged down in all these different vendors and you had all these different clients. Like how many clients were you managing? How many different vendors among all those clients total did you have to manage? I'd love to understand the pain point, right? Of what it was actually causing. Like your team just overworked and or just things falling through the cracks, right? And then you went, we got to solve this. We got to build a platform like VoIP.
So going back to MSP days for a second, a big problem in this vertical or sub vertical for that matter is burnout. Okay. You're expecting too much from your individual technician or engineer. And so they can only do so much, right? And so the end customer has been sold this picture of we'll handle it all.
Yep.
Well, all is a problem if it's not contained. And so at the end of the day, like think early days, and like obviously depending on when you started your IT or technology organization, things were different. But generally speaking, your customer, until it's been turned into a conversation that makes sense to them, doesn't like spending net new money, right? So let's just be honest about it. And so it's your job as an MSP or IT services company to come in and say, well, let me kind of like gather all of the spend that you're spending. And these are sometimes categories that aren't even considered IT.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now by the time I've gathered everything together, I understand your net budgeted cost already. Okay. And so if I can make you more modern, more agile, and work better, hopefully within your existing spend, I call that a win because you're not technically asking them to add new spend, you're just reorganizing. But then sometimes you have to go to your customer and say, hey, listen, there's a lot of duct tape in here and I can't keep this thing running smoothly and I can't drop everything I'm doing every time the duct tape falls off. So bottom line is you need to make an investment to refresh and like clean up your technology that has been piecemealed over many years. And sometimes the answer is no, we're not doing that. We're just going to pay you and you're going to keep fixing and band-aiding. And our response is, I can't do that. And like part of the word risk, by the way, now more than ever, think about now, fast forward to 2023, part of the MSP's process in adopting new clients should be, is this account too risky for me to bring on because they're unwilling to turn on MFA, do security training, do the correct things to limit their exposure by doing a zero trust approach. And now this whole conversation overlaps the plumbing, right? Like, hey, I need a computer that works. I need fast internet. Like, I need my Wi-Fi not to go down. Great, that's plumbing. Now let's overlay modern security and then look at it from a whole. It's the same. So the same problem you had 10 years ago when it came to the customers or the end users not investing in modernizing their infrastructure and standardizing what they're using to what you are delivering is applied exactly the same way today with, is the customer going to adopt the correct security position, posture, whatever, to make sure that it doesn't blow up and the buck stops on your desk as the service provider. Because by the way, no matter what happens, right? The biggest problem with security, Jeremy, maybe tell me if you disagree, is in between the chair and the keyboard, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. But like, what are you doing to bring your risk level down? The MSP can't just take any customer anymore. Because when something does go wrong, they're the ones that are going to get sued. They're the ones that are going to have to explain why. And then they're going to try and be held responsible for the behavior of ultimately the end customer who pressed the wrong button, clicked on the wrong link, got spoofed, or all of the other ways that people get compromised. And like, it's kind of an unfair sandwich. It's a crap sandwich because the government is over here and they're saying all this stuff about, oh, well, the service provider needs to take on more risk or more responsibility. And then you have the service provider saying, man, like if anything goes wrong, why is it always stopped on my desk? It should be shared, but it's really not being presented that way. And you have the customer in the middle pointing fingers in any direction, right? This conversation is no different than rewinding 10, 15 years. Same thing. Why'd this go down? Well, this failed. This particular piece of equipment failed. Well, why didn't you know it failed? Well, it's really old, and like we just can't monitor it in real time like we can the newer stuff. Well, why didn't you prevent that from happening? I can't stop your tire from popping. I can make sure that you're not running on really old tires and like be proactive about it, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't force you to do that. I can give you advice like a doctor, prescriptive, and you're either got to stop eating fatty foods and start exercising or you're not.
Got it.
So
Got it.
like so that's inherently this constantly, reoccurring circle where the service provider is just trying to do right by their end customer, but the end customer is not listening to their service provider. And then, like, the world around us doesn't care about that, right? Because something bad eventually happens. And then all of a sudden, it creates a problem where we're back to this. So just like in my early MSP days, we're like, I can't have 8 different antiviruses and 10 different backup solutions and 50 different phone systems. And like, we need to bring it down to one per category. It's no different. And like, and by the way, when we don't, I have to do this with every single vendor I'm dealing with. It's the same thing on the other side. So how do you manage all of these categories as an IT company and like within the time allotted, right? How do you do that without burning your people out? Because there's so many things that come under the umbrella of we'll just outsource your IT to us, we'll fix everything. That it's not really reasonable to expect every human being on your team, assuming you don't have a million people on in your company, to be able to keep up. And so it is a constant. And by the way, this problem has been solved. Okay, like yes, it's constantly reinventing itself every 4, 5, 6 years because technology is constantly moving, which is, by the way, a lot of the reason people get into this business. It's really like always moving and kind of fun. But like you need to be able to rely on all of these tools, like yours, it sounds like, to bring the time investment down, right? To get all of the reoccurring minutia stuff in a box so that your human being hours are being spent doing, strategic stuff, right? And so there's a lot of technology out there that helps this conversation. The question is the MSP adopting that and actually doing it properly, or are they just buying something and saying, oh, it should just work? Nothing just is turnkey, right? You're going to need to make it work for you. Same thing applies here.
Understood. Switching gears a little bit, what's the MSP initiative? Can you tell us more about that and
Sure.
why you started that?
Yeah. So, um, as an MSP, I went to a ton of events. And like, by the way, I learned a lot from these events, right? This is how I kept up with things in the industry and figured out what was coming next and met a lot of people that was doing what I did just in different parts of the world. And by the way, like the idea of castle mentality for anyone that thinks everybody's your competitor, you need to like erase that from your brain. There's plenty of business out there for everyone. So like let's learn from each other rather than the hard way. Okay. So once I kind of started a vendor company, so MSP, right? You went across to the other side of the curtain, vendor who sells to MSP. Um, looks completely different. I always categorize it as it looks like Mad Max Fury Road, where like people are just blowing each other up and it's a desert and like everybody's every man for themselves, which was really a wake up call. So I was like, like 50, 60, 70, 80, $100,000 for a booth with a chair and 2 tables doesn't really honestly always make sense. And like, not joking, by the way, I remember spending it was like $35,000 for a 3x3 kiosk.
Wow.
And I was like, what is this? Like, why am I'll go buy a nice Honda for that price, right? Um, but anyway, so MSP initiative kind of started with me, under the VoIP umbrella with collaborating with other software and MSP vendors in the industry and saying, hey guys, if we all pool some of our resources together, we can do some really cool things. Where MSP initiative really became a thing was going into the pandemic when the airport shut down and nobody was moving around. We're like, hey, what if we did this outdoors, right? What if we got into an RV or a tour bus and like we had MSPs like loan us their parking lots and like did the whole
Mm.
community thing open air, right? And so for 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022, we literally were going one city a day, in like a 1 or 2 week run, and literally, telling people, hey, listen, take a couple of hours out of your day, get out of your basement or your living room or your garage or your apartment or wherever you're living, and like come out down the street and hopefully in your area, and like let's talk to the other people in your area from a community standpoint. And like, by the way, it would be nice to see human beings again, but number two, maybe they're seeing things that you're not, and then maybe
Yep.
we, just like everything else, we learn together, right? So that's largely why we started MSP Initiative as a like neutral brand, right? Like it isn't about any one company, it isn't about any one
Hmm.
MSP. It was about all of us. And so this Channel Strong tour bus was rolling through America, and we went city to city to city. And then the other part of what MSP Initiative did was these pretty cool, like, let's say you're going to a conference and we're like, there's always one night of the conference that's unaccounted for. Instead of taking everybody out to a dinner or dropping some money at the bar, just pool our funds together, do some really cool things. Like, for example, last year at IT Nation, although it was like, tropical storm rolled through, they shut down the airport in Orlando.
Wow.
We brought in the All American Rejects and did like a private concert for the MSP community. Actually worked out pretty well despite the weather and everything else that happened. So we do like 4 to 6 of these style, different size, events around other conferences and events that are happening. We collaborate as much as we can to make those happen. And then when the tour bus got parked and we're like, all right, everybody's like, cool, right? Pandemic's behind us. We actually flipped into an event where we brought MSPs in and we brought other experts from around the industry, and we did like a hotel style event called MSP Community Minds, where effectively we had MSP panels in the morning. Think about like the human side of cybersecurity, like a
Hmm.
just general town hall. What's happening? What are we hearing? What's ebony and vibing on the ground? And an M&A panel, right? So we did stuff like that. And then in the afternoons, we would get experts from around the industry. So think about a MSP focused lawyer or a
Mm.
cybersecurity, person, or a strategic planning person, or an M&A advisor, or like we would bring these experts in, and instead of just PowerPointing you to death, they did a 2 hour workshop, right? You can have a bunch
Nice.
of 2 hour workshops where like you actually start progressing through an idea, right? Taking a couple of jotted notes down, and then 6 months later, you didn't do anything. So that's where we took MSP Initiative and like created a community style approach to interacting with people on both sides of the aisle, right? Vendors and MSPs, and change the paradigm a little bit. And so that's kind of why we started that one. And by the way, we do some really fun things underneath MSP Initiative that I don't think are possible, unless you're going to have, go to your marketing team and take 6 figures out of it to do something. But I love that, by the way. I love the collaborative, kind of, hey, let's get together and do something cool.
That sounds really, really, really interesting, and I love the workshop approach. I love the targeted, hyper niche focus. Here's an MSP lawyer, here's an cybersecurity for MSPs, right? I think that's exactly what the community needs. Do you still do events? You mentioned 21, 21, 22.
Yeah, so that MSP Community Minds event that I just mentioned was just
Mm-hmm.
last week in Denver,
Oh,
actually.
nice.
So that's relatively new. We have a couple of events coming up still at this year. This upcoming week, we'll be at an event called the Taylor Business Group Big Conference. It's a peer group in Fort that's based. This event's based out of Fort Lauderdale, and we're doing the MSP Community Boat Party, right? Like a mega yacht kind of party going down the intercoastal in Fort Lauderdale towards
Wow.
Miami. And then we have DattoCon in Miami as well coming up. It's another big event in the Sandbox every year. So we'll be doing a block party around that event. And then IT Nation's coming up in early November.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing another block party down there off
Oh,
International Drive. So
oh, we're
like
going to IT Nation too. We should meet up.
we absolutely should. So like this
Absolutely.
is actually coming like September, October, November.
Hmm.
It's conference season. Like it
Yeah, yeah.
really is like a machine gun through the calendar of the year. And yeah, I mean, as BVoIP, between our own events and other industry events, it's very much feeling like 2019, right? Like about
Hmm.
100
Hmm.
ish events on the calendar for us this year. MSP Initiative does, I'd say, about a dozen or so things, throughout the year. Some in Europe this year for the first time since the pandemic. Some here domestically in
Nice.
the U.S. The rest of the year is domestic U.S. I feel like the rest of the year is actually Florida for whatever it's worth. But we love bringing people together, and like, and we could talk forever about the right way, right, to get your message out, your product out, your solution out. Um, the veiled pitch, right? Where you pay a lot of money to get in front of a room and make it sound like it's thought leadership, but it's really just a pitch of your product. Um, I think people kind of have read through the lines, right? Like I think they really understand what is and what isn't. And so I want to like, I know there's a lot of people out there that have this idea, but like, can we flip this back to just a barroom conversation, right? Like, hey, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? Tell me. And like, it doesn't always have to be the pop up banner and the very expensive table and two chairs. I think there's a better way to do it, and like treating everybody like a human being, right? Not trying to avoid people as you're walking down the hallway. I think we can grow past that by just changing the paradigm a little bit.
I agree 100%. Are you on the road right now? You mentioned Denver and then you mentioned
Yeah,
Florida.
so this is my last day not moving of this week. Tomorrow morning, I get on a plane, head down to Nashville for the last day of, I think it's called Exchange down there by Channel Company. And then I get on another plane, and I head to Fort Lauderdale for Taylor Business Group. And then I come back, and then we reset and, the next event, right? So I try and max out at about 2 weeks a month of travel just because still have a family I got to
Wow.
work on the other side, but yeah, it is an event driven industry. Like, and by the way, I love that. As much as technology is cool, we all love it. You can't replace the in person stuff.
Absolutely. Does it get tiring traveling 2 weeks a month, basically half the year?
Um, yeah, I mean, like, as a guy who for some reason gets jammed in airport security about 50-ish
Oh
percent
no.
of the time, like that part really rubs me. Um, but like just moving, right? Like airports and layovers and Ubers and rental cars and hotels and like not everybody's wired to do that on a regular. So you have to like be mentally conditioned for that. And like, by the way, for the people that are road warriors, right? Like you need to make sure that you're not getting 2 hours of sleep a night, and you need to be drinking
Mm.
water because you will get dehydrated, and like shaking hands and slapping backs, right? Like if you actually like the conference flu is real, right?
Yep. Yep.
So like you do need to like think about this as you're constantly on the move, and especially once you start doing the international travel where it's like a little bit longer,
Mm-hmm.
different places, different rules, a little bit extra, hassle to get through where you're trying to get through. Like it just compounds. So, but again, the amount of people that you meet and the authentic conversations that happen and the actual real relationships that are created, priceless. And if people can afford to do that and do it correctly, right? Like I constantly tell vendors in the space, right? Like don't take the intern, put a polo on, put him behind a table and chair, and expect them to build relationships, right?
Right.
I'm sorry. Like, you do need to have the right people representing you on either side in order to get what you need out of whatever it is that you're doing. But,
Yeah. Or doing it
like,
yourself as the owner. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, like, trust me, I'm not the only one traveling for our company. I got people who love to be on airplanes too. Um, but if you get too disconnected from the street, you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
lose a little bit of focus on what makes sense and what doesn't. And like getting real world feedback directly, I think is the best way to like either make sure you're on the right path or pivot properly to where you're supposed to be going. Otherwise, you silo what you think is right versus what's actually happening. And I think that kind of breaks the idea of what the direction is that you're supposed to be going in. So while I appreciate not every owner or founder or C-level person or VP or whatever the title is on the road as often as I'm talking about, um, they should get out on a quasi consistent basis because that's the only way to like understand where you are on the map and get the correct data from the people in front of you, or else, rinse and repeat doesn't always keep you in the right place.
I 100% agree. I think that's a very valuable lesson. But speaking of lessons, in your 23 years in IT, what are some of what's one of your most important learnings?
Yeah. Let's see, there's so many. Taking very technical things and making it understandable is not, an art that everybody, really adopts. It's at times very difficult, and like people who can do that regularly often succeed noticeably better than others. um Everybody thinks they're always right for some reason. It creates conflict that otherwise should never be. um there is a way to bring that down to reality so that you can get through the correct conversation. Otherwise, it can create animosity where it really isn't warranted. Um,
What do you mean? Do you have an example?
well, just like, here's a great example that happens over and over again. My bill's wrong. And then they go to complain about the bill. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's not. Your bill's been the same. He's like, I canceled. There's like, did you? I don't have that. Can you send it? And then all of a sudden it's, I did, but like, then there's no documentation. Then you go back and forth and it's like, hey, man, I don't want to, if it's something small, let's just meet in the middle and call it a day, right? Like, you know, I don't want to get to a point where we're spending all this energy over this piece when there's a larger picture for both of us out there. Like, that's an example that happens often. And then, like,
Oh,
today's blueprint, like, that angry person will go to a Reddit, a Discord,
right,
a
right.
Slack, a Facebook group, a whatever, and do this. And it's like very unnecessary. Like, you should just go to the source and solve the problem. And like, this doesn't help. All it does is stir it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um,
How do you prevent that?
Transparency,
Mm-hmm.
just transparency. Be like, hey, listen, if we screwed up, we'll fix it. Like, we need to validate that that's what happened. We're not perfect, but if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, I need you to own that too. I'm not asking you to do anything unfair. I just want to make sure that everybody's on the up and up. And like, by the way, even if it turns out that you didn't do what you said you did, we're still going to try and help you, right? This
Right,
isn't
right.
supposed to be a one side versus other. We're in it together. It's a partnership, right? So
Yep.
I think people need to like take that mentality on things because nobody's always right 100% of the time. But like, we also don't need to do the screaming match in order to get the end result because like you get bad feelings that way. I think the honesty part and the transparency part also goes across the side. As a service provider, as an MSP, you telling a slanted version of your story that's not 100% accurate as a way to dig into whoever's on the other side of that conversation in an online forum, like, you should get, like, number one, it should have never made it there. But by the way, if you do go there and then refuse to actually have the conversation, like, the truth will eventually catch up with you, right? Don't be that way. Don't be dishonest. It's too
Yeah.
easy to prove that wrong in this electronic age where all of this
Right, right.
data is housed, right?
I've
So,
also I wanted to bring up also another perspective. I talked to some MSPs who work with end clients who maybe the MSP also mentioned, oh, there's billing or not paying their bills on time, stuff like that. And you just told me, whoa, like these billing things could happen often, right? Depending on who you work with. I just wanted to share. So that other MSP that I spoke with on their podcast, they mentioned basically a part in their business where they had to decide to cut those customers completely and focus their energy on the ones who they did have a good relationship with, right? Mutual respect and understanding, transparency. I'm curious to sort of pose that to you. What are your thoughts on? And there's different personalities, different styles to approach various, businesses. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, back to the word risk. Okay. There's a lot of different risks as a company that's just trying to do business. Slow pay, no pay, like cash flow is like the beating heart of practically any company, profit or nonprofit. Um, yeah, if your customers are consistently not paying you on time, you have to ask the question like, there is a cost of money, right?
Yep,
Interest does generate somewhere else, or the fact that
yep,
you can't use your money or you can't pay your bills on time, then create a
yep,
problem, and then it, dominoes. Yeah, it's part of the risk categorization, and like a lot of MSPs, you ever sign up for like a cell phone or an internet provider, and they're like, oh, this offer's only good when you're on auto pay, right? Like, hey, at the first of the month, you're not going to have to press a button. We're going to come and take it. If you don't, come and take it, we're going to give you 5 days grace period because it didn't transact. After 5 days, all your services are suspended. You can't answer the phone. You can't answer the email. You're like, and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, just like the electric company, right? You need
yep,
to pay to keep the electric going. It's the same thing. So if your customer is like, oh, it's okay, we can wait to pay them, that's not going to work, right? Like you as the MSP are not a bank.
yeah, yep,
So it's part of the risk. Like, and you need to make that very clear. Like some MSPs have gone to the process of doing credit checks, reference checks, and like if you find out that this customer is leaving another MSP, and by the way, I love now when one MSP takes over for another MSP. I actually want to talk to the other MSP, right? Maybe it's in the handover. Like I'm just like, hey, can you give me some feedback? Like, what's the deal, right? Like, are these guys easy to deal with, or why'd you guys break
mm,
up, or whatever? And all of a sudden they're like, we broke up because they're like 6 months behind on their bills.
yep,
That's a red flag. But you're probably not
yep,
going to
yep,
get that from the customer, right? You're going to get
right,
that from the other guy. And like people talk, it's a small industry. So like I like that feedback. It's not
mm-hmm.
me versus them. You should have that conversation. So like
100%
for
agree.
me, back to as a vendor who deals with MSPs, who then deals with end customers, I don't want to off and then risk all of these customers being affected without reasonable communication, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to call you, we're going to email you, we'll send you a letter, right? And like part of the reason why things go south in any relationship, let alone MSP, IT, business, whatever, is when the communication stops, okay? Or just this, never happens at all. And like assumptions then pop in, and then all of a sudden somebody else is telling your story in you, and the cookie crumbles in a bad way. So I think final thought on that is communication. Like don't disappear, have the hard conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. The sooner the better. The outcome isn't as extreme. And I would say most people are willing to find middle ground in almost any situation, but you cannot expect that unless this dialogue occurs. And I think that's where a lot of people, the one-way street never works. It just like it usually ends up with somebody being unhappy. And one-way street is an online forum. Yeah. It's very embarrassing when you get called out after that.
Last question here. Who should reach out to you, and what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in all of the LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and email. Like I'm on every channel like everybody else is, right? George Bardissi, Bardissi. I think there's only one of me, so you're not gonna run into another. It's not like Joe Smith, right? It's only one George Bardissi from to my knowledge. Um, if you want to check out what we do at BVoIP, just bvoip.com. Again, we're MSP IT only. We don't sell to, direct end customers. So feel free to take a perusal there. For MSP Initiative, if you can learn how to spell the word initiative, it's mspinitiative.com. Check us out. That's like the community thing. And we really love, taking down the walls and, creating good experiences where people actually have, you know, a very comfortable conversation, which I think is the best way to actually meet people and create relationships. And yeah, I mean, if you're at a IT channel event in the near future, pretty good chance that either I'll be there or somebody from my company will. We love being on the road.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And podcast listeners, tell us you came from the podcast. We'll give you 20% off of Telivy. Links to all the links will be in the description. Thank you so much, George.
Appreciate it. Talk
Yep.
soon, Jeremy.